I didn't think he'd actually leave. That's what I need everyone to understand first. I thought my proposal was reasonable, modern, evolved. I thought when I explained my vision of having him as my primary husband, while I explored secondary relationships with other men, he'd see it as progressive relationship design. I thought the hierarchy I'd created, with him at the top, would make him feel secure and valued. I thought he'd be flattered to be my primary partner. I was catastrophically wrong about all of that. My husband, well, ex-husband now, his name is Callum. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 3 of those years, living in a beautiful house we'd bought together 2 years ago. Really solid marriage by every conventional measure. Loving, stable, secure. The kind of marriage where people asked when we were having kids and we'd smile and say soon because starting a family felt like the natural next step. But I'd been feeling restless for about a year. Not unhappy with Callum exactly. He was wonderful in every objective way. Successful career, emotionally available, good partner, great husband. But I'd started wondering if monogamy was really necessary. If one person could meet all my needs. If I was missing out on experiences by being exclusively with Callum. If modern relationships should look different from traditional models. I'd been reading extensively about hierarchical polyamory for months, about relationship structures where you have a primary partner, your main commitment, your life partner, the person you build a future with, and then secondary partners who fulfilled different needs and desires. It seemed perfect. Seemed like I could have the stability and security of marriage with Callum while also having the excitement and variety of relationships with other men. Best of both worlds. All my needs met without sacrifice. The books and articles I'd consumed made it sound so reasonable, so evolved, so mature. You identify your primary partnership as the most important relationship. You establish clear hierarchies so everyone knows where they stand. You explore connections with secondary partners who understand they're not competing with your primary bond. You maintain honesty and transparency throughout. You build something more expansive than traditional monogamy allows. I'd tried to talk to Callum about it a few times over the past 6 months. Would mention articles I'd read about ethical non-monogamy. Would bring up concepts of relationship hierarchies. Would suggest that maybe we didn't need to be exclusively sexual or romantic with just each other. Would float ideas about how I could explore connections with other men while he remained my primary partner and husband. He'd been uncomfortable every time, had said he wanted a traditional monogamous marriage, had expressed that the idea of me being with other men felt wrong to him, had stated clearly he wasn't interested in polyamory or open relationships, but he'd never given me an ultimatum. Never said, if you pursue this, we're done. So I'd held on to hope that maybe if I presented it properly, with a clear structure and hierarchy, he'd be more open to the idea. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. I'd planned the conversation carefully for weeks. Picked a Friday evening when we were both relaxed and home for the weekend. Made his favorite dinner, slow-cooked short ribs with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. Opened a nice bottle of wine, the expensive Cabernet we usually saved for special occasions. Set the table with candles. Created the right atmosphere for what I thought would be a serious but ultimately positive discussion about the future of our marriage and how we could evolve it together. I'd even prepared a physical document, an actual written proposal, outlining my entire vision for our hierarchical, polyamorous marriage. I'd spent hours on it over multiple days. Used professional formatting, created sections with headers and bullet points, made it look like a thoughtful, well-researched business proposal rather than just an emotional request. I genuinely thought the professionalism and structure would help him see how seriously I'd thought this through. I want to talk about something really important, I'd said after we'd finished dinner and were on our second glass of wine. I pulled out my printed proposal from where I'd hidden it in my bag, 8 pages, stapled, with a cover page that read, "Proposal for Evolving Our Marriage Structure, a Hierarchical Polyamory Framework." Something I've been thinking about extensively for months now, about our marriage and our future together, and how we structure our relationship going forward in ways that serve us both better. Callum had looked interested initially, maybe even excited, probably thinking I wanted to discuss having kids or renovating the house or planning a big vacation or something conventionally positive about our future. "Okay, sounds serious. What's going on? What's this about?" "I've been doing really extensive reading and thinking about relationship structures and marriage models," I started, feeling like I was presenting a solid, logical business case that he'd have to take seriously. About whether traditional monogamy is really the only valid way to build a committed, lasting partnership. About whether the expectations we inherited from previous generations actually serve modern couples in fulfilling ways. And I've discovered something called hierarchical polyamory that I genuinely think could work really well for us, could actually make our marriage stronger and more honest and more sustainable long term. His expression had shifted immediately and obviously, from open and interested to guarded and concerned and slightly confused. "Polyamory. You want to talk about polyamory?" "Hierarchical polyamory specifically," I clarified quickly, as if the distinction and specificity would make it more palatable and reasonable. "It's not just generic open relationship chaos, it's a really structured approach where you have a primary partner. That would be you, obviously. You'd be my primary partner. Who is your main commitment, your life partner, the person you're building a future with, the person who comes first always. And then you also have secondary partners who fulfill different needs and desires, and add variety and excitement, but who understand completely that they're not competing with or threatening the primary relationship in any way. There's a clear hierarchy, clear prioritization, clear understanding of who matters most. You want to have other partners," Callum said slowly, carefully, like he was trying to fully process and understand what I was saying. "Other men, while staying married to me, while living in this house with me. I want to explore meaningful connections with other men while maintaining and prioritizing you as my primary husband and life partner," I corrected, using the exact language I'd practiced in my head dozens of times. "You would still be absolutely the most important person in my life, the one I come home to every night, the one I'm building this life and this future with, the one I'm committed to long-term and permanently. But I'd also have the freedom and permission to develop secondary relationships that add variety and excitement and new experiences and fulfill needs that one person realistically can't meet completely alone. No one person can be everything to another person. That's an unfair and unrealistic expectation that sets marriages up for failure." I slid my carefully prepared 8-page proposal across the table toward him, turning it so it faced him properly. "I've put together a comprehensive framework. It outlines everything, the hierarchy structure and how it protects our primary bond. The rules and boundaries I think we should establish. The time management system, so you always get priority. The communication protocols to maintain trust and transparency. The agreements about safer sex and health testing. Everything you'd need to understand how this would actually work in practice." Callum looked down at the document without picking it up or touching it, just stared at the cover page with its formal title. "You've put together an 8-page written proposal for you to date other men while staying married to me. You've created sections and headers and formatted it professionally. You've spent time on this, significant time. For us to structure our marriage in a more evolved and honest way," I said, feeling increasingly defensive at how he kept reframing my carefully considered proposal. "This isn't just about me being selfish. You could have secondary partners too if you wanted them. The structure works equally both ways. we'd both have the freedom to explore connections while maintaining our primary commitment to each other as spouses. It's about building something more expansive and fulfilling than traditional restrictive monogamy allows. I don't want secondary partners, Callum said flatly, definitively, looking up from the document to meet my eyes. I don't want to date other women. I want my wife, just my wife, only my wife. That's what I thought I had when I married you. That's what I thought we both wanted. And you do have me. I'm still your wife. I'm still completely your primary partner. This doesn't change our fundamental relationship or my commitment to you. It just expands our relationship model to be more honest about human nature and more realistic about needs and desires that naturally exist even in happy marriages. This is about evolution and growth, not about me wanting to leave you or loving you less. So let me make absolutely certain I understand this clearly and completely, Callum said, his voice carefully controlled in that way he gets when he's really upset but trying to stay rational. You want to stay married to me, continue living in this house with me, continue being my wife legally and socially. But you also want to have boyfriends, multiple boyfriends, who you would date regularly and presumably sleep with and develop romantic relationships with. And you want me to be completely okay with this because you've labeled me primary and them secondary and created a hierarchy system. That's what you're proposing here. The hierarchy is critically important, I insisted, feeling like he was deliberately misunderstanding to make it sound worse than it was. It's not just a label. It's a fundamental structure that means you always come first. Your needs are always prioritized above theirs. You're the main relationship, the primary bond, the life partnership. They're just additions that enhance rather than threaten what we have. They're supplementary, not replacement. They fill gaps. They don't compete with you. How many secondary boyfriends are we talking about? He asked directly, pointedly. I hesitated, suddenly wishing I'd been less specific in my written proposal. I haven't set a hard specific number as a limit. The proposal suggests maybe 2 or 3 maximum. However many connections feel genuinely meaningful and authentic and worth the time investment. Quality over quantity. Deep connections rather than casual hookups. 2 or 3 boyfriends, Callum repeated slowly, like he was testing how the word sounded out loud. 2 or 3 other men you'd be dating and sleeping with, in addition to me, while married to me, and you genuinely think that calling me your primary husband makes this acceptable, makes this something I should agree to, something I should be okay with. I think being honest about my needs and proposing a clear structure that maintains our marriage while allowing personal growth is mature and evolved, and ultimately healthier than pretending, I said, using language pulled directly from the books and articles I'd consumed. I think traditional monogamy is unnecessarily restrictive and unrealistic about human nature. I think we can build something better and more honest together if you're willing to consider it seriously. Callum stood up from the table abruptly, picked up my carefully prepared 8-page proposal, started actually reading it thoroughly while I sat there waiting nervously for his response, hopeful that once he saw how thoughtfully I'd planned everything, how clearly I'd laid out protections for our primary bond, how seriously I'd considered his needs alongside mine, he'd understand this could work. He read in complete silence for what felt like forever, but was probably 10 minutes. Flipped through all 8 pages. Read my hierarchy charts. Read my proposed schedule showing how I'd allocate time with primary versus secondary partners. Read my rules about always choosing him if there was any conflict. Read my safer sex protocols. Read everything I'd poured hours into creating. Then, he set the document down gently, almost reverently, back on the table between us. No, he said simply, definitively, with absolute finality. No, I repeated, genuinely shocked, because I'd been so certain that once he read the full proposal, he'd at least see it was worth discussing. You're not even willing to discuss it seriously, to consider the framework I've created. We are discussing it right now. This is me discussing it by telling you my answer, which is no, absolutely not, under no circumstances. I don't want this kind of marriage at all. I don't want to be your primary husband while you have secondary boyfriends. I don't want an open relationship or polyamory or whatever evolved relationship structure you're proposing with charts and schedules. I want a traditional, exclusive, monogamous marriage with just you and me. That's what I signed up for when I married you. That's what I want now. That's what I'll always want. But you're not even considering the potential benefits. I tried desperately. What benefits? Callum asked sharply, cutting me off. Seriously, explain to me what the benefits are. The benefit of watching my wife go on dates with other men. The benefit of knowing you're sleeping with multiple people. The benefit of being ranked primary instead of being your only partner. The benefit of having to share you with God knows how many secondary boyfriends. What exactly is the benefit to me in your detailed 8-page proposal? The benefit of having a wife who's completely honest about her needs instead of potentially cheating behind your back. So, those are my two options. His voice rose in anger for the first time. Accept you having multiple boyfriends openly, or you cheat on me secretly. That's what you're actually saying right now. Those are the choices you're giving me. I'm saying I have needs that one person realistically can't meet alone. Then maybe you shouldn't be married at all, Callum interrupted forcefully. If you can't be satisfied with one person, with me, with what we have together, then maybe marriage fundamentally isn't for you. Maybe you should be single and date whoever you want without dragging me into this hierarchical polyamory structure where I'm supposed to feel grateful and valued that you ranked me number one on your priority list of multiple partners. I don't want to be single. I want to be married to you, I protested desperately. While also having boyfriends, he finished, voice heavy with hurt. You keep saying that like it's a reasonable request, like I should be fine with it because you made a professional-looking document explaining the hierarchy and the rules and the time allocation. But it's not reasonable to me. It's devastating to me. It's not what I want. It's not the marriage I agreed to. It's not what I thought we both wanted when we stood up and made vows to each other. We'd argued for hours after that initial exchange. I'd tried every single angle I'd learned from my months of research. Tried to explain how hierarchical polyamory could actually strengthen rather than threaten our marriage by removing pressure for one person to be everything. Tried to emphasize repeatedly that he'd always be primary, always be first, always be most important. Tried to point out that he could also have secondary partners if he wanted, that this freedom went both ways equally. Tried to frame it as natural relationship evolution rather than me wanting to cheat with permission and fancy terminology. Nothing worked at all. He refused and rejected every single argument I made, countered every point I raised, said over and over in different ways that he wanted monogamy, that he'd always wanted monogamy, that if I couldn't give him that fundamental thing, then maybe we weren't actually compatible anymore, and had never been. Finally, exhausted after midnight, emotionally drained, I'd said in desperation, "So what are you actually saying? We're getting divorced because I want relationship structure evolution, because I propose something progressive. We're getting divorced because you want to have multiple boyfriends while staying married to me, and I want a monogamous marriage with a wife who is satisfied with just me," Callum corrected with painful clarity. Those two things are completely incompatible. Fundamentally incompatible. One of us has to compromise on something absolutely core to what we need and want from marriage. And I'm not willing to compromise on this particular thing. I won't share you. I won't be your primary while you have secondaries. I won't accept the structure. So yes, if this is really what you genuinely need to be happy, then we should get divorced so you can pursue it, and I can find someone who wants the same things I want. I'd backed down immediately then, terrified by how serious and final he sounded. Said maybe I'd been too hasty with the proposal. Said maybe we could completely table this discussion for now. Said maybe I didn't actually need this after all. that maybe I'd gotten carried away with theory and books, but I could see it clearly in his eyes, in his expression, in his body language. The trust was fundamentally broken. The damage was irreversibly done. I'd shown him explicitly that I wanted other men, that he alone wasn't enough for me, and no amount of backtracking or taking it back would ever erase that knowledge from his mind or heart. Serkin ad atiu, en a fo ki sout, on part atiu, dalt dal. For 3 weeks after that catastrophic conversation, Callum was distant in ways he'd never been before. Polite but cold, functional but disconnected. He'd go to work, come home, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed. We'd have surface-level conversations about household things. But the warmth was gone. The intimacy was gone. We were roommates, not spouses. I tried to fix it, tried to show him I was committed to our marriage, tried to demonstrate that I'd dropped the polyamory idea, but I could feel him pulling away emotionally, could feel him reconsidering everything about us, could feel our marriage crumbling, even though we were still technically together. Then one evening he came home with papers, divorce papers, already filed, already in motion. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the documents. "Divorce," Callum said simply. "I've thought about it constantly for 3 weeks. About your proposal. About what it means that you want other men. About whether I can stay married to someone who isn't satisfied with just me. And I can't. So I'm filing for divorce. Because I proposed hierarchical polyamory. Because you showed me who you are," he said. "Someone who wants multiple partners. Someone who thinks categorizing me as primary makes it okay to date other men. Someone who believes one person shouldn't be enough. That's not compatible with what I want from marriage. So I'm ending it." "I told you I'd drop the idea." "You shouldn't have to drop it," Callum interrupted. "If that's really what you need, you should pursue it. Just not with me, not while married to me. You should find partners who want the same structure you want, who are actually interested in hierarchical polyamory, who genuinely want to be part of that dynamic. I want to be with you. As your primary husband while you have secondary boyfriends," he said. "That's what you want. You made it very clear in your detailed written proposal. And I'm telling you I don't want that. I don't want to be anyone's primary. I want to be someone's only. If you can't give me that, then we shouldn't be married." "I can give you that. I am giving you that. I dropped the whole polyamory thing." "But you still want it," Callum said quietly. "You didn't suddenly stop wanting it. You just agreed not to pursue it because I said no, which means you're compromising on something fundamental to keep me, and eventually you'll resent me for it. Eventually you'll feel constrained. Eventually you'll either cheat or leave anyway. So I'm ending it now before we waste more years. You don't know that. I know that you spent months reading about polyamory and put together a written proposal for having multiple boyfriends. I know that level of thought and planning doesn't come from casual curiosity. It comes from genuine desire. You want this, you need this, and I can't give it to you without destroying myself. So we're done." The divorce was quick and relatively clean. No kids. House in both names. We sold it and split the proceeds. Separate finances mostly. Nothing complicated except my heartbreaking while I watched my marriage end because I'd proposed something I genuinely thought was evolved and reasonable. It's been 10 months since Callum filed for divorce. 10 months since my marriage ended because I proposed hierarchical polyamory. 10 months since I suggested having him as my primary husband while exploring secondary relationships with other men. I tried actively pursuing the polyamorous life I'd claimed to need so desperately during that proposal. Downloaded all the apps specifically designed for ethically non-monogamous people. Field, OkCupid with poly settings enabled, Poly Matchmaker, Yash Open. Created lengthy, detailed profiles explaining precisely what I was looking for. Secondary partners for a hierarchical polyamorous structure where they'd understand they weren't primary, but would still be valued and important. Met numerous men over months who said they were interested in being secondary partners to someone like me. Went on probably 50 dates across those 10 months, trying desperately to build the multiple meaningful relationships I'd convinced myself I genuinely wanted and needed to feel fulfilled as a person. Couldn't make any of them work even remotely close to what I'd envisioned. Not a single one developed into anything resembling the beautiful theory I'd consumed in all those books and articles and podcasts. Most men who expressed interest in being secondary partners didn't actually want the kind of deep emotional connection and real relationship I'd been imagining and planning for when I created my 8-page proposal. They wanted casual, primarily physical relationships without real expectations or commitments or emotional depth. They wanted the fun parts, dinner dates, sex, excitement, variety, without any of the relationship work or emotional investment or vulnerability. They'd explicitly say they wanted to be secondary partners, but what they actually meant was they wanted regular no-strings hookups with someone who wouldn't demand monogamy or relationship escalation or meeting families or future planning. That wasn't remotely what I actually wanted, and the few men I met who did genuinely want something more meaningful and emotionally substantial, who did want depth and real connection and actual relationship building, weren't satisfied at all being permanently categorized as secondary in someone's rigid hierarchy. They wanted relationships that could grow and deepen and potentially become primary. They wanted to build toward being the most important person in someone's life eventually. They wanted potential for real futures together, not predetermined secondary status with artificial ceilings on intimacy and importance. They'd go on 3 or 4 dates with me, realize I had a firm, unchangeable limit on how important they could ever be to me, and end things because they wanted partnerships that could become more than I was offering within my hierarchical structure. I went on dates, tried to connect, tried to build what I'd envisioned when I created that proposal. But reality didn't match the fantasy I'd constructed from books and articles. Real hierarchical polyamory required all parties genuinely wanting that structure. Required finding people who were excited about being secondary. Required a primary partner who was actually interested in sharing. I had none of those things. I talked extensively and honestly to my friend Dakota about everything, about researching and proposing hierarchical polyamory to Callum with my detailed 8-page document, about him immediately divorcing me in response, about my failed attempts over 10 months to build the polyamorous life I thought I wanted and needed. She'd known us as a couple for our entire relationship, had been at our wedding, had been genuinely shocked and confused when she'd heard through mutual friends that we were divorcing, had reached out asking what happened. I'd finally told her the full story. She listened to everything without interrupting, before finally saying what I desperately needed to hear, but absolutely didn't want to accept. "You didn't actually want hierarchical polyamory," Dakota said, with uncomfortable, brutal honesty over coffee. "Not really, not in any genuine way. You wanted permission and approval to date other men while keeping Callum locked down as your secure backup and foundation. You wanted the safety and stability and security of marriage, plus the excitement and novelty and variety of new relationships, simultaneously, without having to choose. You wanted him to stay completely committed and devoted to you as his only partner while you got to explore multiple partners. That's not actually polyamory or an ethical relationship structure. That's just wanting everything without sacrifice or difficult choices." I genuinely believed in the hierarchical structure I proposed in that document. "Did you, though?" Dakota challenged directly, uncomfortably. "Because if you genuinely believed in it as a fundamental need or core identity, you would have discussed it with Callum way earlier in your relationship. Like years earlier. Definitely before marriage. Absolutely before buying a house together and building an entire, financially and legally intertwined shared life. You would have made absolutely certain You were compatible on this absolutely crucial fundamental issue before making lifelong legal commitments to each other. Instead, you waited until you were 3 years deep into marriage, and then presented it as a fully formed proposal he should accept, rather than a mutual exploration you'd both engage in together from the beginning. I didn't fully understand what I needed until more recently. Or you knew from the beginning that Callum wanted traditional exclusive monogamy, and you married him anyway, hoping you could change his mind later after he was locked in legally and emotionally. Dakota interrupted firmly. You knew what he wanted. He was completely clear about it from day one. He never gave even the slightest indication he was remotely interested in non-monogamy, or sharing or polyamory, or anything other than traditional exclusive marriage. And you thought labeling him primary and creating professional formatting would magically make him okay with you having multiple boyfriends. You thought the hierarchy and structure would make it acceptable. That's manipulation dressed up as enlightened relationship design, not genuine polyamorous orientation or authentic relationship needs. I wasn't trying to manipulate him. Then, what do you call creating a written proposal for how you'll manage multiple boyfriends and presenting it to your monogamous husband, expecting him to agree because you put him at the top of your hierarchy? What is that if not manipulation? She was right. I'd known Callum wanted traditional marriage. He'd never given any indication he was interested in non-monogamy. I'd married him knowing that. And then I'd spent months convincing myself that hierarchical polyamory was reasonable and evolved and something he should accept because I'd framed it properly and created structure around it. I'd thought the hierarchy would make him feel valued. Thought being primary was enough. Thought he'd be flattered to be ranked first. I'd completely missed that he didn't want to be ranked at all. Didn't want to compete with anyone. Didn't want to share. Wanted to be my only partner, not my primary one. Or Aniran, Alaishal. Nice, and I saw Callum at a mutual friend's party 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He looked happy, genuinely happy in ways I hadn't seen in the months before our divorce. He was there with someone new, a woman who apparently wanted exactly what he wanted: monogamy, commitment, traditional relationship structure, no hierarchies or secondary partners or evolved structures. I watched them together from across the room and felt the full devastating weight of what I'd lost crash over me. Callum had been everything I should have wanted, had loved me completely and unconditionally, had built an entire life with me, bought a house, made plans for kids, integrated our families, created shared futures, and I'd thrown it all away because I'd convinced myself that one person shouldn't be enough, that I needed multiple relationships to feel fulfilled. That hierarchical polyamory was the evolved, honest answer to restlessness and taking him for granted. But the restlessness hadn't actually been about needing multiple partners at all. It had been about the grass is greener syndrome, about boredom with comfortable stability, about wanting novelty and excitement without losing security, about being fundamentally selfish and calling it personal growth and relationship evolution, about taking an amazing partner for granted and convincing myself I deserved more variety than what we had. I tried approaching him at that party, just to say hi, just to acknowledge each other like civilized adults. He was polite but distant, introduced me briefly to his new girlfriend. Her name was Simone. She was lovely, warm, clearly adored him, clearly gave him exactly what I hadn't been willing to: singular devotion and exclusive commitment. They excused themselves quickly and moved to another part of the party, away from me. I left early, went home to my small apartment, so much smaller and lonelier than the house we'd shared. Sat there thinking about how I'd destroyed everything for a fantasy that didn't even work in reality. For a relationship structure I'd convinced myself I needed, but couldn't actually build or maintain or find fulfillment in. The brutal truth I finally had to face was that I didn't actually want or need hierarchical polyamory. I'd wanted permission and justification to date other men while keeping Callum as my secure foundation. I'd wanted the best of both worlds, without sacrifice, the stability of marriage plus the excitement of new relationships. I'd wanted him to accept being one among many, while I got to explore and experiment and have variety. And I'd dressed it all up in progressive language and professional formatting and hierarchical structures to make it seem evolved rather than just selfish. En ilanan eli dersen en eninkin en ehiu en nim. I think about that proposal constantly, obsessively, about sitting across from Callum at our dining table with my professionally printed 8-page document outlining in careful detail how I'd manage multiple boyfriends while keeping him as my primary husband and life partner. About genuinely, truly thinking he'd see it as progressive and evolved and worth considering. About his face when he fully understood what I was actually asking him to accept. About him reading every page thoroughly, and then saying simply, definitively, no, and me somehow not understanding in that moment that our marriage was completely over. I understand now, with painful clarity, what I did wrong. I proposed fundamentally changing our entire marriage structure without his desire for it or consent to exploring it. I expected him to accept being ranked and categorized in a hierarchy when he wanted to be my only partner, not my primary one among multiple. I called it relationship evolution and progressive thinking, when really, it was just me wanting to date other men without guilt or consequences. I thought professional structure and hierarchical labels and careful formatting would somehow make it acceptable and reasonable. I was catastrophically wrong about absolutely everything, and I understand completely why he left immediately, why he filed for divorce without hesitation, why he moved on so quickly and completely to someone who wanted exactly what he'd always wanted, because I'd shown him explicitly that I wasn't satisfied with just him, that being married to only him felt limiting and constraining and insufficient, that I needed, or thought I needed, multiple men to feel fulfilled as a person, and he had too much self-respect and self-worth to accept being anyone's primary when he wanted to be someone's only. The difference between those two words, primary versus only, had seemed so trivial and semantic to me when I was reading theory and creating my proposal. In actual practice, in my actual real marriage with my actual real husband, it had been everything. It had been the entire fundamental point. It had been what destroyed us completely. I said I wanted a primary husband and secondary boyfriends, thought the hierarchy made it respectful and considerate, thought ranking him first, and most important, would make him feel valued and secure, thought he'd understand I was trying to build something evolved and honest and modern and better than restrictive traditional monogamy. My husband downgraded me from wife to ex, filed for divorce immediately, moved on to someone who wanted monogamy, and taught me that some people don't want to be primary. They want to be only. That hierarchy doesn't make non-monogamy acceptable to someone who fundamentally wants exclusivity. That you can't propose polyamory with professional formatting to a monogamous partner and expect anything but the complete end of everything. I learned by losing everything, by destroying my marriage with a written proposal, by pursuing a life structure I didn't actually want or need, by understanding too late that wanting to be someone's primary while having secondaries means you're not actually ready to be anyone's spouse.